If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up and hit the subscribe button as well as the bell to be notified of future videos. Thank you.
Hello Internet, we are back. We've got RSM James Teitge with us. 1 and 5 reconnaissance regiments, commandos. He's a man who's known to you. And today we're talking about military parachuting. It is something he can really talk about. Must I tell you, sir, welcome here. Thank you for your time once again. You're looking good. Can you tell us about military parachuting, especially from a special forces views? Because there was somebody who started arguing with me, saying to me, it's not really different from civilian jobs. I don't see anything which is the same actually, except that both have a parachute on, but you're the expert.
There's a vast difference between military parachuting and sport parachuting. Well, first of all, I just want to mention that all airborne forces throughout the world uses this parachuting, military parachuting. It is a way of infiltration behind enemy lines, and it is therefore a quick method, a fast method to get troops and military personnel and military equipment, in a very quick way, and a far distance behind enemy lines to do a type of infiltration. So it's a way of infiltration. There's many ways of infiltration, but using parachutes is one of the methods to infiltrate into enemy territory. It's very quick, and you can cover long distances, and also it can be a kind of a element of surprise to the enemy when you do parachuting. And also I want to mention the difference between military parachuting and civilian sport parachuting. You get 3 types of military parachuting. The first one is to jump out of an aircraft with a round parachute. The round parachute is big and it can carry a lot of equipment. And then you get another way of infiltration by means of a square parachute. We call it a ram air parachute, to jump with, and it's also using a static line. I just want to mention the first method that I just mentioned, the round parachutes, also working with a static line, which is a line that is attached to the inside of the aircraft, and when you jump out of the aircraft, that static line will open the parachute. And then to go back to the second method of parachuting is by means of a ram air parachute, a square parachute, which is also attached with a static line in the inside of the aircraft. When you leave the aircraft, that static line will open the parachute, and then you can fly with a square parachute towards the target, or near the enemy, or whatever the case may be. And then the third method of parachuting is very high altitudes, where you jump with a square ram air parachute as well. This is free fall. We call it HALO. It stands for high altitude, low opening, where you jump out of an aircraft which flies at a very high altitude, where you need oxygen and a very warm equipment and clothing, because at very high altitudes the temperature is very cold. I think the coldest we measured at 37,000 feet was minus 60 degrees Celsius. So you need special equipment to do such a jump. And for that jump, you need oxygen because above 13,500 feet, you need oxygen, supplementary oxygen. And then higher than 18,000 feet, you must have continuous oxygen, which you use from the aircraft in the inside. And just before you leave the aircraft, then you you change to a bottle which is attached to your equipment, and you use that oxygen bottle to breathe. So that is the other method. And then we've got a other method which we called HAI-HO. It stands for high altitude, high opening. So when you leave the aircraft, you just make sure you're quite stable. When you leave the aircraft, then you open your parachute, and then you can fly a very long distance. At a very high altitude, you can fly towards the target. So just to mention the two types of parachuting, high-low is where you jump out of an aircraft, high altitude, low opening. So you do free fall from a very high altitude, let's say 37,000 feet, and then you open your parachute at 3,000 feet, and then you land at a specific spot. Also, what I want to mention is that these parachutes that we use, the military parachutes, are quite big. The ram air parachutes that we use for high-low and HAI-HO is a 350 square feet material parachute, so it's quite big. And the reason for that size is to carry heavy equipment, that is weaponry, with your weapons, your ammunition, water, food. So your backpack gets attached to your body. It's in the front of your legs, and when you open the parachute, you can suspend this equipment, and it hangs on your feet until you land. Then you just kick it off. So that's why the parachute is so big, is to carry that equipment. The other reason why the parachute is that big is it can fly. Let's take the scenario where you jump out of an aircraft on HAI-HO, high altitude, high opening. You open the parachute at a very high altitude, just after you leave the aircraft. You open your parachute immediately. That means you approximately, let's say, about 36,000 feet above sea level, and then you can fly to the target. So the opening shock and the sound, the enemy cannot hear it. And also, for each meter that you drop, you can fly 3 meters forward. So depending on wind direction and speed, you can fly long distances towards the enemy and land at a specific spot, and then you carry on with the task. Sport parachuting, if people want to say it's similar, it's not. We don't do sport. We don't exercise any sport with the military parachutes. We use it only for infiltration to behind enemy lines or towards a target, and that is the main reason why all military forces in the world uses military parachuting.
May I ask you, sir, these places where you would land, it's often at night. Is it possible for you to even see where you're landing, or you just go down in the dark?
Yeah, very good question. Most operations by parachuting, especially in special forces where we jump high altitudes and fly towards the target, is at night. Most parachute jumps is at night. We've got equipment that's attached to us, like a GPS system that we can use to do navigation at night. But if you can remember, some time ago we said we're not using GPSs because some elements can pick up that we are busy doing infiltration or whatever. So we can use a compass and a map that we do navigation on. But also you will not be able to see the map. So as long as the aircraft knows exactly where he dropped us, and then from there we can navigate by just using a compass to get close to the target area or the landing area, which we called a landing zone. There's only one problem: you cannot see trees or a very bad landing area, so that you cannot see. But your altimeter will give you the height that just before landing, so you can work out you're going to land any moment. And then we've got a light that we attach to our body that is hanging on a approximately 15 feet rope. Just before landing, it's a illumination light. These that works with chemicals that you break and then you drop it, and then that light will give you indication just before you land, because you have to use brakes to do a proper landing. So that 15 feet will give you indication when it hits the ground. You know that you must apply your brakes to do a proper landing. So that is the two things that we use when we do jumping at night.
When you say brakes, do you mean what some people call flare? Where they push it's like they grab the handles and they push it forward down. And it seems like they stop in the middle of the air just before they hit it.
Yeah, we call it brake lines. It's also called steering lines. It's the same line that you use to apply a maneuver in mid-air to turn left or to turn right. If you apply both of those steering lines by putting them down, you flare the parachute. That means that forward speed, you break it down from 35 kilometers an hour to about 0. So that's also, we also can call it, you apply brakes. In other words, you flare the parachute just before landing, so you've got a soft landing.
I've heard some people say to me that they stood upright while jumping with this pumpkin thing, the round one. Is that possible? Because I don't believe it. That they took a landing and they didn't fall down, they just stood there like you would do with a square rig.
You cannot, a round parachute, especially operational, when you jump out of the aircraft, that parachute goes straight down. You get a couple of models in the round parachutes. The first one is, we call it a pompoon. It's got no steerable ability. In other words, it just goes straight down and you hit the ground. So there's no way that you can apply brakes or turn left or turn right. It's a parachute that they use for operational purposes, because operational jump can be at a height of 600 feet. During training, it's 1,000 feet, where the round parachute opens, and then it takes about a half a minute, and then you land on the ground. But operational jumps is from 600 feet, where the parachute deploys, and it's only got a minimum time in mid-air before you hit the ground. In other words, land on the ground. So that parachute you cannot steer, and we call it a Soviet Mark 1. And then you get a Soviet Mark 4, which has got some modification at the back. So it's got a small steering capability, left and right. And that left and right is just slightly to go to the left or go to the right. And also you use it to turn into wind so that your landing is quite soft. But it hasn't got a big steerable capability. but it's also a round parachute, and it goes a little bit forward, and you can steer it a little bit to the left and the right, just to miss obstacles, but not a very big steerable capability. And the Saviak Mark IV has got a little bit of forward speed, but not much.
Let us say that there's 6 of you jumping at a halo jump. And that is where you just free fall down to the earth. How do you keep information with each other?
Okay, you see, you leave the aircraft almost simultaneously. Let's say you won't do a jump like that from any other aircraft. It will be a C-130 at least, because of the aircraft's good navigational ability, and also because it's got a big ramp at the back. So they will leave the aircraft almost simultaneously, and then they will group in mid-air. And during mid-air, we've got also that same illumination stick. We put it on our helmets, where we will look at each other while free falling. And then just before the opening of the parachute, we will break away, steer away from each other by means of a flying method that we get training in, just to move away from each other so that we can open our parachutes safely away from each other. And then during the night, we will look at these illumination sticks on the helmet, and then we will fly towards each other and then follow the leader towards the target. So you put an illumination stick on the back of the parachute at the back, and then one illumination in front on the helmet, and that's the way that we can see each other in midair.
So that would be the same with a AO, where you open it right outside the aircraft, so to speak, as quickly as possible. Would you then form up in a flying formation to reach the target at the same time?
Yes. What is interesting about a hey-ho jump is that we weigh each other, and the heaviest person will take the lead. In other words, he will not hold back the rest of the stick, if we may call it we call it a stick. So he will leave the aircraft first, open his parachute first, and you open your parachute in a poised manner. Poised means in parachuting where you leave the aircraft facing the aircraft. The aircraft, you see the aircraft flying over you. You leave the aircraft in a poised manner, and then you open your parachute, and then you wait for the others to come out and open their parachutes, and then you make a 360 turn, and then you fly away from the line of flight of the aircraft. In other words, it's 180 degrees away from the aircraft. You can also say the direction where the aircraft came from. And normally, the aircraft flies in that pattern to give the parachutists the indication where they are dropped, and that they must do a 360 to fly towards the target. So the first man leaves the aircraft and looking towards the aircraft. The others also do the same, and then they all do a 360 turn, and then they follow the leader towards the target. And the leader plus another person in the stick will do the navigation by using a compass to fly the direction that is needed.
And then everybody will form up on him, and he's the one who will get you to where you want to be.
Yes, for sure.
Well, what happens if something goes wrong with him? So what if somebody has a malfunction, and I'm not, touch wood, I'm not putting anything on anybody. Is that where your emergency drills come in again?
Yeah. You see the parachute, these parachutes, it's got a method or a line which is attached from the main parachute to the reserve parachute. Both parachutes is at the back of the jumper. There's no parachute in front. The Soviet series parachutes, the round parachutes, the reserve parachute is in front. It's a front-mounted reserve parachute. But the free fall parachutes that we use for these type of parachute jumps and operational jumps, the reserve parachute is also at the back of the jumper. In other words, when it's a union. No, it's the one parachute. It's got on top the reserve parachute, at the bottom the main parachute. So if the main parachute deploys, and there's something wrong with that parachute, and you do a cutaway, we call it a cutaway, is where you must get rid of the main parachute, because you cannot deploy the reserve parachute at the same time, because the reserve parachute will get entangled with the main parachute, and then you've got big problems. So there's a handle on your rig, on your system, which we call the cutaway handle. So you pull that and you cut away the main parachute. And then there's a lanyard, which the sport parachutes don't have. There's a lanyard that's attached from the main parachute to the reserve parachute. So if you do a cutaway, the reserve parachute immediately deploys. So there's almost no difference between the main parachute and the reserve parachute. The reserve parachute deploys so quickly that there is about no height loss. So it's immediately deployment of the reserve parachute. We will not jump without that system.
Well, that's marvelous. So I'm also thinking, I've heard about a Rhodesian SAS member who somehow lost consciousness. I don't know why. This was way back. And apparently they had some kind of a timing device or something on him, and the parachute opened by itself, which saved his life. Do you know anything about such devices?
Yes, all our parachutes has got a automatic opening device. We call it a Cypress. It's a small piece of equipment that is packed inside your parachute, and that device opens the reserve parachute only, not the main parachute. So if someone is maybe unconscious, he hit his head against the side of the plane when exiting, or whatever the case may be, and he's unconscious, he will go into a fall until a certain height, and that Cypress will open his parachute. So and that Cypress is exactly the same Cypress that sport parachutists also use in their parachutes. But there's a little difference. The military Cypress is slightly different from the sport parachute jumpers that they use. But the method of operation of that piece of equipment, the Cypress, works exactly the same. And you can set it at different heights where it must open. So let's say you must do a very high altitude jump. You can deploy that at a higher altitude, or you can set it for different altitudes.
While this parachute is open, sir, is it possible to speak to each other, to shout towards a mate who's a few yards away?
Yes, it is possible, but then you must be very close. But if you do operational jump, you don't scream at each other, definitely not. But we've got radio equipment that we can use among the jumpers to talk to each other. So we've got that ability as well.
Sometimes when you see a parachute display team, they seem to walk on each other's parachutes. They're hanging right like a pyramid almost. What do you think of that? Because to me that looks damn dangerous.
That is a dangerous maneuver, but you see the civilians, that is a sport discipline in the parachuting community. We call it canopy relative work, CRW in short, where parachutists do formations in that type of sport, and it's a recognized discipline in the parachute sport arena, where people they specialize in that type of sport. It happened in the past. We call it a rap, where one parachutist just in an aggressive manner just hit another parachute, and then they get entangled, and then they've got a little bit of problems. But you practice that type of sport slowly in the beginning until they are very skilled to do that type of sport parachuting. But it's quite nice. I've done it before, but I don't like it because it is slightly dangerous to do CRW. I did it just to get a license, and after that I never did it again. But there are some sport parachutists that love it, and they do it as a sport.
May I ask you, what is a Roman candle?
A Roman candle is just a slang word that we use in parachuting, where you deploy your main parachute, and then it doesn't want to deploy completely. It stays above you, and it's a lot of mess. It's like a lot of washing stuff above you, and the parachute doesn't want to deploy properly, and you keep on falling like that. In other words, there's not any friction or let's say stopping of the fall because of this, because the parachute doesn't want to deploy properly. So it's a lot of just material and line above you, and the parachute doesn't deploy properly, and then you have to do a cutaway. You must execute a cutaway to use your reserve parachute. That method, that's one of the let's call it emergencies in parachuting. A Roman candle is only one of them. There's 10 different scenarios, or let's say emergencies that you can use. In other words, different types of deployment of the parachute that you have to execute a cutaway to deploy your reserve parachute. But the Roman candle is one of them.
I've been told that before you can go on a halo or high-ho course or jump, they do check your teeth for fillings or something. Is that true, sir? And if so, why?
Yeah. Before you see, all parachutists, military parachutists, must do a free fall course before you can do halo. There's no need in the military for free fall as a military method of infiltration. Not free fall, but we have to do the free fall course so you can go over to halo and high-ho, because it must be a free fall qualified person before he can do halo and high-ho. So you do the free fall course, which you don't need any medical checkups before you do the course, because it's a very low altitude. But before any person can do high-ho and halo at very high altitudes, he must undergo a strict medical examination to make sure that he is 100% healthy for jumps like that, because the strain on the body is quite heavy. Now, one of these checks is to check your teeth, you know, your fillings in your in your teeth, if there is a little cavity that's open space, because there's air in it. So as you go up at very high altitudes, there's a release in pressure. So the pressure on Earth, we are used to walking around on Earth, we are used to the pressure at a zero altitude or up to, let's say, 4,000 feet above sea level. We are used to this pressure at this altitude. And as I mentioned earlier, if you go to 13,500 feet, the pressure is still normal for any human being. I also want to mention that normal freefall sport parachutists, the civilians that practice the sport parachute with sport parachutes, they don't go higher than 13,500 feet, because then you need special equipment and oxygen to go higher than 13,500 feet. But as you go higher, up to 18,000 feet and more, to get back to that cavity in your teeth, let's say inside your teeth where you did a filling way back, that cavity expands. So there's a release in pressure. So the release in pressure builds and builds up, and as you go higher, you feel the pain in your mouth because of that filling, and it can explode. In other words, it can break that teeth. It literally explodes, and the pieces of teeth goes into your cheek in the inside. And then there's a lot of blood and stuff like that. So it can be very dangerous where there's a cavity in your teeth, a small gap, and the air inside expands, and it later becomes very sore. You get first experience a very toothache, and then as you go higher, it can explode, and the teeth can break into pieces. And that's why during your medical examination, they check your teeth, they x-ray your teeth to make sure that there is no cavity inside your teeth. And if there is, they take out that filling and they refill it so that there is no cavity inside your teeth.
Should that happen actually? Let's say for some reason you start getting these aches. Is it possible to ask the pilot to go lower down?
Yes, that is one of the methods to relieve that pain, is to go lower. But you can think for yourself, each jump that is at a very high altitude costs a lot of money, because the aircraft at a very high altitude, let's take for instance 35,000 feet, the air is very thin there, the pressure. So the aircraft must fly much faster than on let's say 15,000 feet or 20,000 feet. At 37,000 feet, because of the thin air and the pressure up there, the aircraft must run at full throttles to stay in the air, because also the air pressure keeps the aircraft afloat. In other words, flying, keeps it flying. So the less pressure there is, the more the aircraft must fly with full throttle to stay in the air. And the one jump I did at 37,500 feet, the aircraft was at full throttle flying forward, because it can't go higher anymore because of the thin air. There is no air pressure for the aircraft to go higher. So it is quite an expensive exercise to fly that height. So if there's let's say any problem in the aircraft, there's also sicknesses that you can get at that altitude, like hypoxia. That's where a person, as oxygen was not properly attached to his face, and then he will pass out, and then that aircraft must immediately lose height and go to a height where it's safe, where he can breathe normal oxygen. And the same with a toothache. Let's say that cavity expands in his mouth and he feels this heavy pain in his teeth, then we will ask the aircraft to lose height and then go to a lower altitude where the pain will resolve, and then you will definitely, after the landing, go to a dentist to solve that problem and put a new filling in his mouth.
Did the army had good dentists?
Yes, we have. Especially, we do our medical tests at the Flying Institute here in Pretoria, where all pilots do their medical. So the medical is exactly the same as for pilots. So we go to that medical institute, Flying Medical Institute here in Pretoria, and we do our medical tests there before we do a halo course.
This is really fascinating to me, so thank you. Can I ask you about the dispatcher, the role of a dispatcher, the guy who slaps him and tell him to get out?
Okay, you get if I mention the different courses. The first course that all airborne soldiers do, and also special forces, is a basic static line course, a parachute course. That is a 3-week course where normal soldiers go to parachute battalion, to the airborne school, and then they get trained as a static line parachutist. In other words, all airborne forces throughout the world does a similar course, and that's the first course everybody does. And if I mentioned before, that is the course where a static line is attached to your parachute, and you hook it up inside the aircraft. When you leave the aircraft, that the parachute will open. The next course that you do is a freefall course. A freefall course that is for members that will do the halo and HAO course later. So between the static line course and the instructor's course and the freefall course, a soldier with some experience will be called upon to do the dispatcher's course. Now, the dispatcher course is also a 3-week course, and that is where we train dispatchers. We call it dispatchers, which we train parachutists to be in control of the jump at the back of the aircraft. In other words, a dispatcher is a person that will check the parachutist on the ground before they enter the plane, and check that the parachutes are safe and rigged properly, and as well as the equipment. He will also check the equipment, that all the attachments and the hooks and the lines and everything on the equipment is packed in the correct manner, and also the safety. Check the safety aspects on each parachutist, and then he will march them to the aircraft. They will board the aircraft, and then he will check the seatings of each parachutist, and he will introduce or give him the strop. That is the line that he must hook his static line to, and then he will check that that is safe, and there's a pin that you also must attach to the hook. He checks that as well, and then there's a few drills that must be followed just before jumping. They will stand up, they will get checked, they will declare that they are correct and willing to jump, and then they will control the parachutist at the door for a proper and a neat simultaneous exit out of the aircraft. So the number one, there's normally 2 dispatchers. The number 1 dispatcher is in control of the aircraft and the inside, and the number 2 will report to the number 1 on any mistakes or if everything is fine. So the number 1 will dispatch, and that's where the word comes from. He's a dispatcher. He will dispatch the aircraft when the green light comes on. He will say to the first person, go, and he will tap the member on the shoulder, and he will exit the aircraft, jump out of the aircraft. And then after that, 2, 3, 4, depends on how many jumpers there are, and he will hit each, tap each jumper on the shoulder, and that gives the jumper the command to jump. So when they all out, they will retrieve the deployment bags that is dangled outside the aircraft. They will pull the static lines, and the deployment bag, they will pull it into the aircraft, and then they will unhook all the static lines and make sure when the aircraft lands that all that equipment goes back to the unit.
Well, that's a very responsible job. So I must ask, who's actually in control of a jump, sir? Is it the pilot or this dispatcher guy? Who can refuse to jump? Let me ask it like that.
Well, there's one command that is given from the number 1 dispatcher, and that he shouts out to the jumpers, declare, count, what do you call it? Tell off. That means they tap each other from the back. Let's say there's 10 jumpers, then the back guys say 10 okay, 9 okay, 8 okay, 7 okay, and it carries on till number 1 in front, and he will say 1 okay, stick okay. That is a declaration from the jumpers, and that means I'm ready to jump and I will jump. That's a declaration that they give. So they will jump. It only happened once in my lifetime where a jumper, and that was for operational jump, where a jumper refused to jump. If a jumper refused to jump, you will be charged for let's say execution of a command, and he will be dismissed out of the airborne unit to go back to a normal unit. He will never jump again. So there is some law complications if a person refuses to jump out of an aircraft. I mean, you can take for yourself, why does anyone go to an airborne unit? Because it's voluntary. Why will he go to an airborne unit and he's going to refuse to jump? That doesn't happen. So I only know of one incident where a parachute jumper refused to jump. That doesn't happen.
Yes, and I believe so. Just to be clear here, this fellow said he was Special Forces, but he wasn't actually Special Forces. I just want people to know it's not a South African Special Forces member. This was a fake.
Yeah, this person that I mentioned that refused to jump, you won't believe it. He was an ex-Rhodesian in 1980 when the Rhodesians came to South Africa and joined our SADF at that time. He came to Special Forces because, according to his papers, which was false, said that he was a Special Forces member in Rhodesia, and he came to South Africa, and then we had to do an operational jump, and he had delicate equipment with him, which we needed on the ground, and then he refused to jump because it was a night jump. And he just said, no, he's not going to jump. So that equipment stayed behind in the aircraft, which we urgently needed on the ground. So he was charged and immediately sent out of Special Forces, not to come back ever.
But what happens physically with such a thing? Because men are lining up and now they start jumping and suddenly this guy just refuse? Do you barge him away and go forward, or is he unhooked? What happens?
Okay, if any person refuses to jump, you do not force him. You cannot take him and throw him out of the aircraft. No, you take him, put him to the rear, and you unhook him, and he must fasten his seat belt. So you do not force a person to jump. That's one of the rules that we've got in the military. When a person refuses, we call it a refusal. He doesn't want to jump, so you do not force that person. He goes back to the aircraft, and then we will deal with him at a later stage.
What are the chances of a dispatcher falling out of an aircraft? Because I've noted they always wear parachutes and they always seem to be attached to the aircraft. But they don't have any other equipment. I mean, should he fall out there, he's going to be sort of without a rifle.
It happened before where a dispatcher fell out of the aircraft. It was a C-130. Something hooked on him and he went out with a parachutist and he fell out of the aircraft. But he's also got we call it a monkey chain, which is attached to his parachute. He's also got a parachute on his back, and we call it a dispatcher's parachute on his back. And on that parachute, he's got a strap, which we call a monkey chain. He hooks that up at a safe, strong point in the aircraft. So the chances of him falling out is minimal. But it did happen before where a guy fell out of the aircraft, but he just deployed his parachute and landed on the ground. So that did happen once, I know of, but that was the only case ever where a dispatcher fell out of the aircraft. It normally does not happen.
Now I want to ask you about your civilian jumping, sir, because I do know you're holding national colors, actually, in parachuting. Can you tell us about that? How did that come about?
Yeah, you see, this type of sport is different from other sport. Let's compare rugby, for instance. A guy must be young, quite young, to be a good rugby player. But in sport parachuting, it's different. The older you get in sport parachuting, the more jumps you've got, and you only get experience by doing a lot of jumps. So you all the very good parachutists in South Africa are middle age and older. So as you progress in your sport, because I was interested in the sport because of the military parachuting, so I did some of the sport and I started to love the sport. So I started to practice different disciplines in the parachuting, and we also got a military competition, which is only a few of those disciplines. We don't exercise all the disciplines in the military. So, and one of them is style and accuracy. So I love the type of jumping, by jumping out of an aircraft and you must land on a little spot. And I started to get experience in that, and I was very good in that. So, and the style, as where you leave the aircraft and you do a maneuver in mid-air, a sequence of maneuvers in mid-air, and then you open your parachute, land, and then the judges on the ground, they look through massive binoculars to see if you did the right thing. And also you do it against time. So they clock you when you start and they end the time when you finish. And in that specific time, you did a few maneuvers in the air. And that is style. And then the other discipline that goes hand in hand with that is accuracy. Jumping out of an aircraft at 3,500 feet, you come towards Earth, and there's a big mat, and it's got a electronic a measuring pad in the middle, and in the center is about 2 centimeter a dot, and you must try to hit that dot. So if you hit that dot, let's say 10 times out of 10, then your score is 0. In other words, you've got 10 consecutive zeros, but that is very unlikely that you will do that. But I hit that small 0 a couple of times, and from that middle to the side of the electronic pad is 16 centimeters. So if you hit the pad on the side, you get a 16 centimeter score. So the bigger the score, the more you are out of contention to win. So the person that jumps very close to that center is likely to win the competition. So I started to enjoy this type of sport. So I started to exercise it, and I got myself a proper parachute, because you get different parachutes for different disciplines. We spoke about the CRW just now. That is a specific parachute for that type of discipline. So for accuracy, you get a specific parachute for that discipline. So I bought myself a parachute. I started to practice, and I just got better and better, and until such time that I was chosen to represent South Africa in World Championships in this discipline.
And may I ask, how did it go?
Well, how did it go internationally?
Yes, during the test.
Well, it is. It's just a big honor to take part in the World Championships. But South Africa was not good in the sport. We had individuals that was very good, but other countries, they let's call it the national champion in accuracy. If we can just take that one discipline in accuracy, the all other countries, their national champion is normally a military person. And if you look at the military sport parachutists, America, Russia, Austria, England, they do it as a profession. In other words, he's in the military, but the only thing he does there is parachuting. So he jumps every day and do 6 to 8 jumps a day. And there's no way that we can do it in South Africa. So there's no way that you can compare us to these other countries that are very professional in parachuting. And then he's still a young guy, because that's all he does. We went to Austria, just to give you an example. We went to Austria, and we stayed there, and we jumped with their national team, and the whole national team was military people. And the same with America. Their national team is military personnel. And we looked at their routine every day. They do physical training just for that type of parachuting, and they do parachuting the whole day, every day. And that's all they do. They don't do any other military training. So we cannot compare with people like that does so many jumps. You take a young guy of 23, then he's got 8,000 jumps. There's no way that we can compare ourselves with those people. But we didn't. We still did well in World Championships, but there's no chance that we can beat these guys that are so professional. No, definitely not.
Well, they have a lot of money, so they have these display teams of them was going wherever something happens, they all jump. Now I have to ask you about that, sir, because how hard is it to jump into a stadium, like a rugby stadium, for a display jump for some reason? How difficult is that?
It depends how you look at it. When I start jumping into stadiums, we call it a show jump. a display jump. You use jumpers that's got a D license. You get a A, B, C, D license in parachuting, in the sport parachuting vicinity. And you use people that's got a D license to do that. And a D license is normally a person that's got 1,000+ jumps. You're not going to use a novice to jump into a stadium. You use experienced jumpers. I can remember the first time I jumped into a stadium. It was at Kings Park in Durban for the military tattoo, and it was scary, and it was a night jump as well. My first display jump into a stadium, and it was a night jump as well. So it was scary, but that was breaking the ice, and after that I enjoyed it. So for a experienced jumper, it's not that difficult. In other words, they can do it, and they've got the experience to do it. They know where to land, they know where to turn, and that is the where the experience comes in. If you see a video of someone hitting a pole or jumping into the crowd or have a bad landing, then you know he's a novice. He's not an experienced jumper. And I know some other countries, they just use any military person to jump into a stadium, and then he lands onto into the crowd or in the pavilion or whatever the case may be. And also experienced jumpers, there is a person in charge of those jumpers. We also call it a free fall dispatcher, and he will look at the weather and the wind direction and stuff like that. He also does the spotting. So he's a very experienced person flying over the stadium into the wind. Always the aircraft will fly into the wind, and then there's a reception party inside the stadium that will activate a smoke grenade, normally an orange, yellow, a very light type of smoke, so that the jumpers that leave the aircraft can see the smoke, the direction of the wind, and they know exactly where to turn and how far they must turn, because the smoke indicates also the wind speed. There's also a person outside the stadium deploying a smoke, because smoke inside a stadium is different from outside the stadium. So you see both smokes. The one smoke trails fast, then you know the wind is very strong, and you also test the wind. So experienced jumpers that will jump into a stadium is not difficult. So it depends on the jumpers itself. Many jumpers you see on video that they hit poles and they land into the crowds and stuff. They are novices. They're not experienced jumpers. For sure they are not.
Sometimes these jumpers have like a huge flag or a thing hanging below them. And sometimes they have like a smoke flare or something attached to their feet. How does that work? And does that make it more difficult to steer that parachute?
Yeah, you see, you get they call it Skydivers Smoke. It's a smoke canister that provides a smoke, and it's attached to your leg. And normally on the side of the leg, which is away from your deployment of your parachute. So the parachute does not get entangled with the smoke. The one way we do is to attract the attention of the crowd on the ground, by just before you leave the aircraft, you pull a pin out of the grenade, the smoke grenade, and then you leave the aircraft, and it takes a couple of seconds, let's say about 20 to 30 seconds, and then the smoke will deploy, and then it leaves a trail as you do free fall. it leaves a trail in the air, and the crowd on the ground can see the formation clearly. The other method is you jump out of the aircraft, you deploy your parachute, and as soon as the parachute is deployed, then you lift your leg and you pull the pin. And then as you fly through the air, it leaves this smoke trail, which looks very nice. So until you land, you must just be careful, because that smoke canister can get very hot and it can burn a hole into your parachute. So when you land, you must just make sure that this canister doesn't touch your lines or your parachute, because it will burn it. And then using flags, a flag, if you use a normal size flag, it's got a lot of it's got a lot of drag on the parachute. In other words, the jumper, because of the size of the flag and the wind. So you must be experienced jumper with that as well, because it will drag you a little bit. So where you used to penetrate the wind and you fly without a flag, your parachute is much faster, and you know the landing is different. So the parachute will react differently. So you must be an experienced jumper as well. And then the parachute, the flag will have drag on your parachute, so you must know how to steer the parachute for the landing. So the parachute will fly much slower. And normally, the people that jumps with flags, they go out last out of the aircraft, and they open their parachute higher, so they stay away from the rest of the parachutists. But it also happened that all the parachute jumpers got flags on their legs. It's stuck, packed neatly in a bag with Velcro around your leg, and then when you open your parachute, you open this bag on your leg, and you pull out the parachute, and on your system on the top there's an elastic band, and you hook with a small hook, you hook it onto that elastic band, and then the flag trails behind you as you fly with the wind. It will extend, and it will fly behind you. So we also had in the past massive, big national flags, which was manufactured specially. I'm talking about a big, massive flag, and it needed a weight, a heavy weight at the bottom, so that the parachute after the flag can trail straight. Otherwise, with the forward speed of the parachute, it will just, like a Roman candle, as I discussed, it will just make a straight line behind you, and you don't need that. You don't want that. You want the seam of the flag must be straight. So you attach a heavy weight on the seam of the flag at the bottom. So it's attached to your leg in that instance, and the weight at the bottom will keep the flag straight. So that drag of that massive that massive flag is immense. It drags the parachute a lot. But yeah, and also that flag is also manufactured with a different kind of material, and normally parachute material. It's a very thin, lightweight material. You cannot use very heavy material like the material they use to manufacture flags. It must be from a different material, so that the flag is not a big problem. Drag, it doesn't causes a lot of drag on the parachute.
If there's someone listening here who wants to take up the sport of parachuting, do you have any advice for them?
Yeah, if there's people that is interested in the sport, we can mention it. It's a civilian sport. There's a club at Wonderboom Airport. There's a club in Carltonville, and then all over South Africa in the big cities, there are clubs which they can go to. They must just Google it and then find out where this club is, and then they can go there and they can do a sport parachuting course where they start off by doing training. Instructor will give them training, and it's definitely not the same as the military training. No civilian can come to the military and do military training. It's not allowed. So they have to go to a civilian sport club where they do the training, and then they start off with static line parachuting, and then they will go forward and then excel to free fall, and then later become a sport parachutist if they are interested in that. And then at all these parachute clubs, there are also Tandem Masters, where a free fall, a very experienced free fall parachutist becomes a Tandem Master, where he attach a passenger to the front of himself, jump out of the aircraft, and he deploys the parachute, and he lands with the passenger on the ground. If there's people interested in that type of jump, just to do it at a once-off thing and not doing the course, they can do that as well. And it's quite an experience to do that.
Is it difficult, sir, for the tandem master to control that person in front of you?
Yeah.
Because they might not be small people, you know, by civilians, they might be a bit overweight.
Yeah. No, you know General Bormann at this stage, you've heard from him. And I took him a couple of times on a tandem jump. And he's now a little bit thinner than he was when he was a brigadier general. He was a big guy. And I took him a couple of times for a tandem jump. And you hear me out, that's not easy, and it's not very enjoyable to take a very heavy person. That is the first thing. The second thing is you get sometimes a passenger that as soon as you leave the aircraft, they go into a frenzy. They get hysterical, and they grab your arms because you need your arms to stay stable. They grab your arm, or they can, you know, they get very hectic in the air, and then you must make sure that you deploy your parachute immediately so it can get calm, because as soon as the parachute is deployed, then that free fall excitement disappears from the passenger, and he will calm down. And sometimes the passenger also passes out, and then they just hang there. But you don't have to worry about it, because as soon as you get close to Earth, they normally wake up. So it happens that some passengers becomes a problem while doing a free fall jump with a passenger. But all tandem masters are trained to handle situations like that, so they know what to do. So it's not a problem. If a person gets too excited or scared or whatever, and get hectic, then you can handle it.
But it's inherently, I suppose, a dangerous sport, sir, because I'm speaking now to Colonel Frans Fourie in 2 days from now, and I understand he had a vicious accident, actually. I don't know what happened. And I also heard that there's a police special task force member who died a few days after another accident. And I don't want to say to people, don't go. I think statistics is probably more safe than flying. But you do need to know what you do. So you do need to choose the right school. You can't just go to a backyard guy and, you know, think you're going to survive a jump.
No, definitely not. You go to a parachute club that's registered with PASA, Parachute Association of South Africa. You go, all clubs must be registered, and also with Aero Club. You know, the aircraft Infinity, it is a registered club, and also the instructors in that club are members that is also registered as instructors, and they're not just instructors. They had to undergo an instructor's course. I'm talking about civilians now, not military. That's civilian sport. They also undergo a special training to become an instructor, and it's not all. And also, it's not any person that can become an instructor. It's not any person that becomes a Tandem Master. He must have experience. He must have a certain amount of jumps, and also his licenses must be a D or high, up to a D license before he can become an instructor. So and I know some of those instructors. They are highly experienced. I really feel that any person that wants to do a free fall course or the sport parachuting can go to these clubs that I just mentioned. They can just look it up at Google or whatever, and then they can go to these clubs, and I can guarantee that the instructors in those clubs are highly qualified, and they are good jumpers. I've jumped with many of them, and I know they experienced jumpers and instructors. People doesn't have to fear about that. The incident of Frans Fourie, I've got my personal ideas about it, which I don't want to elaborate a lot on it. But what happened there is Frans did a turn too close to Earth. In other words, it's a 180-degree turn, which we called it a hook turn with a square parachute. If you do a 180 turn with a parachute, your body gets thrown to a horizontal way, and then the parachute must be high enough for the parachutist to swing again back underneath the parachute and then land. And in Frans Fourie's case, he did a turn which he was too low to to come out of that turn and come underneath the parachute and then land. And he hit the ground with his parachute almost horizontal. So it was a very bad landing for him. And that happens often with young sports skydivers. They want to be these big shots, heavy shots. They buy these small parachutes. The smaller the parachute, the faster the parachute is. And you can execute a certain maneuver with these parachutes by doing a hook turn, a 180 turn, or a 170 turn. It's a half, one turn, and then a full 180, and then you reach a speed up to about 100 kilometers an hour, because the parachute has got a certain building speed. With no wind, it can go. Our military parachutes is 35 kilometers an hour forward speed with no wind against you. And you get these small sport parachutes. We're talking, I said that a military parachute is about 350 square feet. You get sport parachutes that's 80 to 100 square feet. It's very small. And they travel at a very, very high speed. From opening at 3,000 feet, it's only a few seconds, then that parachute lands. So you can think for yourself, if a novice buys a parachute like that, and he does a slight wrong turn, like a hook turn, he can kill himself with the open parachute. And it happened before, where young, let's call it skydivers, buy these highly maneuverable parachutes, small parachutes, and the slightest fault that he executes with that parachute, he hits the ground and he can be injured very badly and maybe be killed. It happened before that people killed themselves with an open, proper parachute. Nothing wrong with a parachute. I just want to mention that when you do the parachute course, I'm talking about civilians now, going to a civilian parachute club, and start off with a parachute course, they do a static line first, and that parachute is a square parachute. It's a ram air parachute. It's not a round parachute, but it's a static line. Remember, I mentioned that it's a line attached to your parachute. Excuse me, and it gets hooked up inside the aircraft. The jumper leaves the aircraft, and that static line will deploy the parachute. You don't deploy it by yourself. So you start off with a course like that. But that square parachute is big. It's a 300 or 350 square feet parachute. So the jumper obviously is a novice. But that parachute is a slow flying parachute. It's not fast. So he gets used to that parachute. And as he progresses to and become very experienced, he will go smaller and smaller for parachutes to fly faster and stuff like that. So they don't have to fear that they jump with a parachute that will come in very fast and they will have a hard landing. They don't have to worry about that. In my days in the military, up to the last day of my pension, when I went on pension, I did my last jump just before I went on pension, and I enjoyed my life in the military, parachuting and the sport, and all my tandem jumps, and especially the halo and hayo jumps. That was special, very special jumps. Because a few things happened in my life, jumping at a very high altitude, and where you can't see the earth, the whole base of clouds is underneath you, and then you go through the clouds. It's quite amazing to break through the clouds and then see the earth beneath you. And I tell you, it is very special. It was special. Very special my whole parachute career.
Yes, I've heard about that, that sometimes you jump and the sun is sort of still shining there on top, but it's dark on the earth already.
Yeah. Yeah, can I explain one jump?
Yes,
That
of
was
course.
very interesting.
No, Raj.
I jumped a hayo jump, and we were a few people. It was in Bloemfontein there at Kenilworth. It's just outside Bloemfontein at the airport there. We did a hayo jump there. We flew out far, we jumped out, we immediately opened our parachutes and we flew towards the target. And we couldn't see the earth, so we used compasses and stuff like that. And so we kept on flying. And and above the clouds, the sun is shining. So at a certain stage, I see the clouds coming closer and closer. And all of a sudden, I see these blinkers, if I may call it blinkers. It looks like blinkers, thousands and millions of blinkers around me. And I didn't know what the hell is this. It's shiny. The sun is shining on it, so it looks like these small metal plates, like well, I just mentioned the blinkers, and I went through it, and I didn't know what it was. And as I went through the clouds at the other side, I was completely covered with snow. I was white as snow, as those blinkers were snow crystals that went onto my body, and I was completely white. And then I got very cold, because remember I mentioned that at very high altitudes, the temperature is very cold. It's the coldest I ever got was minus 60 degrees Celsius. It's colder than your deep freezer at home. So it's very, very cold. So when I went through that cloud on the other side, I was completely covered in snow. But then I got very, very cold.
It must have been a most amazing sight. The snowstorm at what?
Yeah.
20,000 feet.
I can't remember what the height it was, but I wrote it down in my logbook. So the whole jump and the experience.
Talking about logbooks, I've heard that every soldier and every jumper has like a little logbook. Is that true?
Yes. What do you mean, a parachutist or
Yes,
soldier?
Well, both a civilian jumper as well as the soldier. But they have these logbooks
Yeah,
in which they.
yes, we all have our logbooks. And what happens is you write in the jump. There's certain blocks there, height, date, um, your co-jumpers. You write their names in there. You know, the logbook is one page. Um, there's a lot to write. So you take it to your jump master afterwards, and he signs it. He signs it off. So each jumper has got a logbook.
So it's possible if I ask anybody how many jumps did you do, that he can give me a fairly accurate estimate or count.
Yes, they should. But I know of jumpers that stop logging and they don't have a book anymore. I know there are some of them. So they just carry on and enjoy the parachuting. They don't make the effort to write it into a logbook anymore. I know one guy, Brian Slate, that jumped with us. He was in the Air Force. He was not a military qualified jumper. He was a sport jumper. And he had over 8,000 jumps. And he just stopped logging. So he cannot say how many jumps he's got.
Does
So
it take
it happens.
Does it take a special pilot to make sure that the jumpers are safe when they leave an aircraft? Because I believe there are speed limits which this pilot has to keep to.
Yeah, you see what happens when the aircraft flies over the target or the exit point. Then the dispatcher, he does the spotting. He looks out of the aircraft. I'm not talking about halo or HAO jumps. That is totally in the hands of the aircraft and the pilot. There's a red light on. The ramp will open 3 minutes before the time. The checks will be done. I'm talking about a HAO and halo jump. And then when the green light comes on, you leave the aircraft. You don't look at the aircraft, at the ground at all. But with sport parachuting and free fall, the dispatcher, he looks outside the door or the ramp. It depends. And he will give directions to the pilot to go left or right to fly 100% over the release point, the exit point. So he gives instructions to the pilot. And you asked the question just now, who's in charge of the jumpers? It's the jump master. The aircraft pilot is not in charge of the jumpers at all. He's in charge of his aircraft, but the jump master is in charge of the jumper. So he does the spotting, and he will show the pilot to throttle back. He makes a cut over his throat, and that means cut the engine. So he comes down in revolution. So the aircraft comes down in speed, because at the high speeds the exit is quite immense. You know, the wind that will hit your body. So you don't want that. You want the aircraft to fly as slow as possible, and then the dispatcher will show the jumpers to exit.
It's astonishing to me, sir, that I forgot to ask you the most basic of questions, and that is, what do you feel? What are you thinking when you're sitting there and you know you're going to jump and it's quite far down the ground? What goes through your mind?
Yeah. Okay. There's two different feelings. The first one if you do the sport. The second one if you do an operation. There's two completely different feelings. Now, I've done military jumps before. Before you leave that aircraft, I'll tell you now, your heart wants to climb out of your throat. The adrenaline is pumping. You are very scared. So the person that say he's not scared, he's lying. There is no way that a person cannot be scared, because it's not human to jump out of the aircraft, first of all. And I mean, and then jump into the night as well. You can't see the earth. And then thirdly, you jump into enemy territory. That makes it so much worse. But even with the sport parachuting, it's exciting. You love it because you get used to it, especially if you've got a few thousand jumps. You get used to the jumps. But that fear and that adrenaline is still the same. It never stops. You always have that feeling something can go wrong. Uh, I mean, you jump out of an aircraft at a very high speed. You do free fall at about 220 kilometers an hour, falling towards Earth. Open your parachute. As soon as your parachute opens, then that fear is gone, because you know then everything is fine, and you do a proper landing, and you say, "Yippee! That was a great jump." Especially if you walk away from it. They say each jump, if you walk away from it, is a great jump. So it's something like that. But you always have that fear in you. It doesn't matter how many jumps you have. It doesn't matter how experienced you are. That feeling of, you know, that adrenaline is still pumping, your heart is beating, and you are still scared. If you're not scared anymore for parachuting, you must stop jumping, because then you're going to become a danger to yourself.
How easy is it to breathe through that halo mask, as well as the oxygen mask, the once you connect it to your own oxygen? How hard is it to breathe through that thing?
Yeah, you see, while the aircraft is flying to that height, you make use of the aircraft's oxygen. There's consoles in the middle of the aircraft, because you do a halo and higher jump out of a C-130, because it can reach that height. In the middle of the floor is, we call it an oxygen console, with pipes, which when you get into the aircraft, the dispatcher will show you your pipe, and then you take that pipe and you couple it up with a pipe on your body, and that pipe is also your mask on your face, the oxygen mask. So you make use of the aircraft's oxygen. But on your body, you've got the bottle. We call it a bailout bottle. It's attached to your system, to your oxygen system, but it's not activated. So you make use of the aircraft's oxygen the whole time, and that is breathing normally, inhaling, exhaling. So you breathe normally on that system, and the oxygen that you take in is 100% oxygen, just to make sure that you don't get what is that sickness? Claustrophobic. Yeah, and so you breathe normally, but just before you exit the aircraft, you activate your bailout bottle. That's the bottle on your body. You activate that, and then you break off the aircraft system. So now you're on the bottle on your body, and that bottle pushes the oxygen into your face with force. That is to make sure that no other, what do you call it, carbon
Dioxide.
oxide comes into your mask, because you will pass out as quickly as snapping a finger. You will pass out if you get that into your body. So that force will force out all that carbohydrate out of your system. So then you leave the aircraft when the dispatcher shows you to jump, and you will make use of that oxygen until you're in a safe height where you uncouple the mask from your mask, from your face, and that is at 13,500 feet. You can uncouple it in free fall, or you can uncouple it after the parachute is deployed. And that's what I used to do, is to uncouple the mask from my face as soon as my parachute is deployed. So that mask and the bailout bottle gives you your oxygen while doing free fall, or on a higher jump while under parachute, because you open your parachute as soon as you leave the aircraft, and that oxygen bottle is enough to provide oxygen throughout your flight until in the safe height where you can remove your mask.
At that cold, when that door opens, that ramp, does that not do something to your eyes?
Yes, it does. You see, the ramp is opened 3 minutes before exit. Before the ramp open, the checks are done completely. All the checks, all the safety checks is done, and your goggles is already on your face. In other words, to cover your eyes. And the goggles is a special manufactured goggle that's away from your lenses, from your eyes, so that the cold doesn't get very close to your eyes, because your eyes can freeze and you can get damage on your eyes. So you cover your eyes long before the ramp is open, and also you the glasses is far away from your eyes, so that the cold doesn't get close to your eyes. During free fall, it's not a problem. It's the same. It's very cold, and your goggles can clog up a little bit. But we've got a special liquid that we clean our goggles before the time, and then fog will not clog up your goggles, so you can still see. So it doesn't happen easily that your goggles gets clogged up. Sometimes when you open your bailout bottle, that quick oxygen that comes out of your mask, that clogs up sometimes your goggles, but it's only for a short while, and then the fog disappears, and then you can jump out of the aircraft. What do you do with your equipment? On static, if you do a static line jump, your kit that is attached to your legs, you suspend the equipment. In other words, you leave the aircraft. We're talking about static line now. A static line with a round parachute at 1,000 feet. You leave the aircraft, the parachute opens, deploys, you go through your checks. There's certain checks that you do, and then you release, you suspend the equipment. It's two hooks that is on the sides of your body, let's call it side and front. You release these hooks, and the equipment falls away from you, and then there's a suspension rope of 30 feet, and the equipment will hang on this suspension rope 30 feet below you. So the equipment will hit the ground first, and then the parachutist. So you pack your equipment in such a way that breakable stuff is packed on top of your backpack, your equipment, and equipment like clothing and hard stuff, food and stuff. You pack that at the bottom, because the bottom of the backpack will hit the ground first. Now in free fall, high-low and high-ho, it's different. During high-low, your kit stays on your leg throughout free fall, and then you open your parachute, and then you fly quite a distance with your parachute. Let's say you open at 3,000 feet, and then you fly with your kit on your legs, your equipment on your legs. You fly around, and then at around about 1,000 feet, you suspend the kit, the same as a static line. It's also got a suspension rope. So if the equipment falls away from you, it will hang on the suspension rope. But what happens is, when you suspend the equipment, you catch it with your feet, the straps, your burgundy or your backpack straps. You catch it with your legs, and then the equipment will hang underneath your feet. And then just before you land, where you do that flare that we mentioned just now, by pulling down both braking lines, and then the parachute will stop. And just before you put your feet on the ground, you just kick off the equipment, and it falls just that little distance. We're talking about a meter or two from your feet, and then you land. And the same with high-ho. when you leave the aircraft, you keep the equipment on your legs throughout the flight of the parachute, because you jump out of a very high altitude, let's say 35,000 feet. You fly towards your target. You keep your equipment on your legs, and the same for halo. Just before you do the landing, you suspend the equipment, hanging on your feet. You hook it with your toes, and then just before you land, you kick the equipment off. If you miss the equipment from your feet, it will hang on the suspension rope below you. So the landing won't be that 100%, but it is still safe.
It's amazing, the tricks of a trade, which I'm sure comes with experience.
Yeah, for sure.
RSM, thank you so much. I really appreciate your time, your knowledge, your experience. I think we've learned a lot from you tonight. To everybody else here, as I always say to you, you are not unimportant. Come and talk to us. Tell us your story. I am told that the channel now has created some kind of a momentum. I get letters from former soldiers, policemen. They tell me they are proud again. They say they feel like young men listening here. And that makes me feel good. So I thank you all. If you wish to tell us your story, please come and talk to us. RSM, thank you so much, and God bless.
You're welcome. Thank you. Bye.